And as disco blew up, it blew up, literally. Hey yo, MuchMusic. On behalf of the entire MuchMusic team, I, as your new favorite Much personality, hopefully, would like to wish you all a happy Black History Month. Indeed, it's a time where we all celebrate Blackness and everything that the Black community has contributed to our world's history. Even though the month is short, the list of contributions are long and span different categories like civil rights, innovative technology, food, fashion, and of course, arts and entertainment, music specifically. So, if you haven't already, celebrate Black culture by showing your appreciation to musical genres with Black roots like rock and roll, jazz, blues, electronic dance music. Yes, electronic dance music. Like house music. If you didn't know, let me keep you in the loop and give you a breakdown of how house music was built and why this is important to understand during Black History Month. Our story begins like any other great story does, with a fire. In the 1970s, there was a movement that was hot in the streets, and it was born in the underground nightclub scene as sort of a safe haven for marginalized community. In particular, Black and Latino folks of the LGBTQ+ community who were negatively affected by US laws that prohibited same-sex couples or pairings from dancing together at establishments with liquor licenses. Disorderly conduct, they called it, which justified the harassment of gays in said establishments, which then led to the Stonewall riots of 1969. Disco! Yes, disco. The disco era was post-hippie movement and post-civil rights movement. So it was almost like a coping mechanism from all the race rioting, the wars, the protests, the marches, the assassinations, and all these social, economical, and political movements that plagued the 1960s. Disco was very inviting and come as you are, not only establishing itself as countercultural, but its own cultural movement. Everything from the dancing, to the fashion, to the slang, to the drugs. Oh yes, the drugs. As disco was spreading across the US and the UK like wildfire, there had to be a definitive soundtrack to go along with it. Not gonna get into the whole who's who and what's what of disco music, but some of my favorite disco songs from that era are On the Radio by Donna Summer, Turn the Beat Around by Vicki Sue Robinson, and He's the Greatest Dancer by Sister Sledge, also known as my theme song when I was in high school. It's worth noting that in the beginning, Black artists and Black performers in disco were laying down the groundwork for their presence on the radio. Acts like the Hughes Corporation, Carl Douglas, Gloria Gaynor, Van McCoy, Vicki Sue Robinson, Joe Tex, and many others were burning up the charts. However, in 1977, the success of the film Saturday Night Fever helped to propel disco into the mainstream. With John Travolta and the Bee Gees, who lent their voice to the movie soundtrack, they served as figureheads to the disco scene's whiter audience. See, many people have pointed out that this is just another one of those instances where a genre or a culture that was predominantly for or by a marginalized community was repackaged or reappropriated and then redefined in a white image. However, the success of Saturday Night Fever and the Bee Gees actually did very little to shake the perception of disco. Disco music in the mainstream was still very much a reflection of the Black and gay communities. And as disco blew up, it blew up, literally. Anytime something is popular or mainstream, it's always gonna have haters. And boy, did disco have haters by the tail end of the 1970s. On the evening of July 12, 1979, what was infamously known as the Disco Demolition Night took place at Comiskey Park during a Chicago White Sox baseball game. It was there that Chicago radio DJ Steve Dahl blew up a dumpster full of disco records, inciting a riot. Over 50,000 people stormed the field to further trample on what was considered to be disco's gravesite. But unbeknownst to Steve Dahl and the 50,000 disco haters was the fact that out from the ashes of this disco cremation would rise a new beast, ironically, in the same city. As America broke their disco fever, a Chicago DJ by the name of Frankie Knuckles was cultivating a sound in the underground club called The Warehouse. By taking disco, funk, Latin, soul, jazz, and even reggae and dub music and altering them in a mix. This style was gaining popularity amongst the crowd at the Warehouse, thus dubbing the sound itself as house music. In 1982, Frankie Knuckles would open up his own nightclub called the Power Plant, where he would continue to electrify nightclub patrons by putting house music on full display. Much like the disco scene when it first started, the house scene was primarily made up of folks from the Black, Latino, and the gay communities. No matter what era, no matter what decade, marginalized people will always see a need to find a safe space for them to just be themselves and party without judgment or harassment. Disco offered that in the 1970s, and so did house music during its developing stages. Over the radio, a DJ group by the name of Hot Mix 5 was complimenting Frankie's house music revolution by playing on air whatever tracks that Frankie was spinning and chopping up the tracks live, the genesis of the radio mix. Then in 1983, another DJ named Ron Heart Attack Hardy opened up Music Box, which helped to popularize the club scene in Chicago. Ron Hardy offered up an alternative to Frankie's smoother approach with a more louder, faster, thumping approach. I guess that's why they called him Heart Attack, am I right? So as this movement, as this culture started to build up, the official soundtrack would come behind it, with DJs starting to produce their own house tracks so that they can play during their own sets. In 1984, another DJ by the name of Jesse Saunders would release On and On, which would serve as house music's first official release. Larry Heard's Can You Feel It would come in 1986 to establish Deep House, and Marshall Jefferson's Move Your Body would be released the same year and would go on to be revered as one of the most influential house tracks of all time, as it was the first to use a piano chord progression, a staple in the genre. If the early to mid 80s was about black male DJs establishing and building the foundation for house music as the definitive sound for electronic dance music, then the 90s was about black female artists or black female singers being the definitive voice for the genre. In 1989, Kim Mazel released her debut album, Crazy. This release would help to export house music to the UK due to the string of hits from the album that would top the charts out there. That same year, all the way from Belgium, Technotronic released Pump Up the Jam, which peaked at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, cementing itself as the first house track to be a hit in the US. As Eurodance was gaining popularity outside of house music and techno, another genre that has black roots in Detroit, groups like Corona, Snap, Live and Joy, and my personal favorite La Bouche featured the voices of black women who grabbed your attention on hits like Rhythm of the Night, Rhythm is a Dancer, Dreamer, and Be My Lover. But that standard was really set by the likes of Robin S., Crystal Waters, and CeCe Peniston and the success of their songs, Show Me Love, Gypsy Woman, She's Homeless, and Finally. 3 of the most quintessential songs in house music that have stood the test of time by living on in the works of many to come afterwards, from Travis Scott to Pink Pantheress to Beyonce. So you're probably asking, why is this so important to talk about during Black History Month? Well, as a black boy growing up in the 2000s who loved listening to different genres of music, especially house music, techno, and Eurodance, I was always met with the stigma that EDM was not for us. And the reason why this stigma is even a thing is because over the years, just like rock and roll and disco, EDM has been redefined in the eyes of whiteness, thus giving it this attitude that it's not for black people. The evolution of house music is sort of like the demolition of a house in the neighborhood just to make way for the construction of a condo. And just like real life gentrification, those who once lived in the space were displaced and replaced with people who don't even know the history. I would argue that that much is very much so evident when you look at the crowds for EDM music festivals like Veld or Tomorrowland. Of course, I understand that that's what happened when a genre or a culture is exposed to a mainstream audience. But most people, black, white, or otherwise, aren't even aware of EDM's black roots. The commodified, commercialized version of EDM was normalized to the point where people who were once inside the space are now viewed as outsiders, as well as viewed as outsiders for trying to be inside by the group that they're inside of, and they don't know that it was not always an outside thing. In other words, I was a black boy who was into EDM, even though it was viewed as a white thing by black folks who more than likely didn't even know that it had black roots. Everybody got that? But since the 2010, there's almost been like a reclamation of this space by black artists in the black community, just as it's always been accepted and celebrated by the LGBTQ+ community. Usher, Kelly Rowland, Chris Brown, Rihanna, and will.i.am were all in their EDM bags at one time. Montreal's Kaytranada has made a name for himself inside the house music genre. In 2022, Beyonce and Drake dropped albums with a lot of house music elements, even resulting in Beyonce's Break My Soul winning a Grammy for Best Dance Song. Now I don't care what anybody says, I friggin' love Honestly Nevermind. With more black artists embracing electronic dance music, I sincerely hope that there's a point in time in the future, if it isn't already, where black kids can listen to house music or techno music or Eurodance or trance and not even think about anyone daring to come up to them and say that it's not for us. It's always been for us. Another one for the books. Again, I just want to say happy Black History Month to everybody watching. If you like the conversation that we're having about house music, comment below what your favorite house song is, some of your favorite black house artists, as well as black artists in the house music space that you feel need to be spotlighted or celebrated more. That being said, like and subscribe to Much Music. Much love.